I've made a slight mistake in my Atari Jaguar video. Basically, I was focusing on the console's hardware and said that that was the reason the console was a failure. But that's not exactly true. You see, having an actually working, non-crippled console is only the first step to have a successful console. Atari failed step 1, so is it surprising to learn that they also tripped over themselves in every subsequent step? So let's go over why. First of all, just to quickly skim through the hardware. So this was supposed to be the first 64-bit console. It had 2 megabytes of DRAM, a Motorola 6820, and then 2 RISC chips, Tom and Jerry. Tom contained the GPU, object processor, blitter, and RAM controller, while Jerry contained the DSP and sound system. Basically, the 6820 was meant to be a control processor, while Tom and Jerry did all of the actual work. However, it was kind of rushed to market and crippled. So, there was a hardware bug on the memory controller that made it so Tom and Jerry couldn't access the 2 megabytes of RAM directly. They could only work on their 4 or 8 kilobyte scratch pads. Actually, the Master System had 8 kilobytes of RAM and 16 kilobytes of VRAM. Tom had a 4 kilobyte scratch pad and Jerry had an 8 kilobyte scratch pad. In a way, the Master System had double the addressable memory of these 2 chips. Even though they could access more, they had to first DMA it into their scratch pad in order to work on it. Anyways, if you wanna actually do something, this already cripples the performance. But let's say you wanna do something big, like a 3D game, then you'd run into bus issues. Basically, due to the CPU choice, the bus was so slow you would need to choose between music and 10 FPS or 15 FPS. Yeah, the lack of music in Doom on the Jaguar wasn't just a mistake, it was a necessity. Also, bit-wise, there was 64 bits featured in, like, the blitter? But who gives a shit? Atari said, oh, if you add up Tom and Jerry's 32 bits at 64, and if that was the case, the Saturn and 32X would have also been 64-bit, and they weren't. Technically, the Mega Drive would be 24-bit because it had a... Whatever. We know they're not. Funnily enough, the N64's 64-bitness actually did more harm than good in that system, but that's not the target of this video, is it? Also, the GPU had no texture cache, so it had to load a texture every time it had to draw something, which is why a lot of Jaguar games had no textures. The controller was a scourge in this world, but you already know about this last one already. So this could have been fixed by, like, you know, swapping out the 68020 for a better CPU, improving the bus speed, adding a texture cache, buffers, fixing the bugs. But that wouldn't have availed Atari. They should have also really used a CD drive and not an add-on that breaks all the time, but they couldn't. They were in a money hole. That is why they rushed the system. That is why it was the way it was. They had no money to spend on this new advanced system, and so it was rushed to market instead of having a chance to succeed. And so it didn't. Of course, Atari was working on a different Panther system as well, and then that one was cancelled because Atari hates good decisions, I guess, and then the Jaguar was pushed out into market, and even if the Panther did release, I believe it would have also sucked, but whatever. So, how did it actually launch? Well, okay, I mean, I know we all know it sucked, but like, it supposedly sold under 150,000 units, yeah, with worse sales than the Virtual Boy and 32X, and also arguably worse design. Yeah, so there were actually quite a few pre-orders in Europe, apparently. So the console first launched in the US. Great Decision, where it sold 17,000 units in 1993. Not a good start, but launching for $250, which, by the way, was a slap in the face because it was announced for $200, things were already going wrong. And as it launched in late November, as 1994 was just on the horizon, this was possibly the worst time ever to release a system like this. 1994, for those who don't know, was not only the year that the PlayStation 1 and Saturn released in Japan, although in November, not only the year that hard-hitting 3D arcade titles like Cruisin' USA, Virtua Fighter 2, Tekken and others came out, not only the year where Doom, System Shock, Warcraft, The Elder Scrolls XCOM and Wing Commander 3 released on PC, not only the year that Sonic 3 and Knuckles and Phantasy Star 4 released on the Mega Drive, but also arguably the best year of the SNES. Super Metroid, Final Fantasy VI, Donkey Kong Country, Earthbound, Mortal Kombat 2. And what did the Jaguar come with? The system had a total of 63 games. And 13 of them needed the fucking toilet seat add-on. So are any of them actually good? Well, Tempest 2000 is, but let's look at the 3 launch titles. Raiden, Cybermorph, and Trevor McFur in the Crescent Galaxy. Raiden is a port of Raiden, you know how it is. Cybermorph is the where did you learn to fly game, and it was compared unfavorably with fucking Star Fox. And while our fucking Star Fox is far less impressive on a graphical level, it was actually not only running on the SNES, but actually far more fun to play, and even if it's less graphically impressive, it still looks better. The third game is a horizontally scrolling shooter. It received many 3s and 4s out of 10. From other games, there's like Checkered Flag, Doom and Wolfenstein 3D were ported. Look, if you want to look at all the ports and all like the really shitty games, go watch AVGN, he has you covered. If you want to know some good games, I mean Tempest 2000 was there, but that was ported everywhere. Iron Soldier and Alien vs Predator, the second one being the best-selling game on the system, came out by the time the PS1 was either on the horizon in Japan or just on sale. In short, it had no games, no reasons to buy it, and there was also like... So imagine you're a guy in the 90s, right? And you see the humble Jaguar. Why the fuck would you buy it when no games were out for the damn thing? And by the time some decent ones were, you were already hearing reports of the true next generation starting in Japan. Why would you care about this thing? Well, because of the games, right? Yeah, there were none, and here's Atari's hubris. Also, in mid-1995, when the PS1 and Saturn launched, they were both retailing for $299. The SNES and Mega Drive were $200 on release, meaning that by the launch of the Jaguar, you could pay a bit more to play jack shit, or pay less to play far more. And later on, when it got a price drop, you could pay less to receive a fucking dead weight. You could pay the same amount of the price you would pay for a dead weight to get the SNES and Mega Drive, or just pay the full price for a PS1 or Saturn. Also, a commenter of mine said that his friend's mother in 1996 got his friend a Jaguar instead of a Nintendo 64. What a poor kid, man. Also, Atari just didn't understand gaming. Like, they would see a franchise was kinda popular, and then they would try to make one of their own, not understanding that people didn't like just a genre. They often liked games in that specific genre, and they also not only liked good ones, but notable ones that have some kind of notoriety, things you could recognize in a store, and Atari had none of that. First of all, a lot of the games on the Jaguar's already pathetic library, like Rayman, Doom, and the other ones, they were already on far better platforms anyways, so why would you want a Jaguar version? And a ton of other games just didn't release. Atari also didn't comprehend that, like, you actually needed to have publishers. Atari didn't have money to put the companies on their platform, so they didn't. Hell, Atari won, like, a many $million settlement against Sega that gave them a pretty fucking good payout, you know? And It made it so Sega should have put out like a couple games on the Jaguar, but those games never materialized, so it's safe to say that Atari either wasn't bothered, or they didn't have the money to actually pay people to put games on their system. Hell, when developers like Activision, Ubisoft, ID Software, all of the other ones, when they signed up, most of the time they just gave Atari ports and not actual games made for the system. And those ports were far better on other systems as well. And not a single Japanese company was actually working with them properly, so the Jaguar lost out on a lot of the potential big hitters. Wanna play Street Fighter? It's not on the Jaguar. Wanna play a game actually worth touching? It's either not on the Jaguar, or it has a better version not on the Jaguar. You know those two games I mentioned earlier, Iron Soldier and Alien vs Predator? Yeah, those are the two good exclusives. Even the 32X has more of them. So there you go. The console was tripled physically, horribly supported, Atari was broke, they got developers to make ports of their games, but they never actually made unique ones, you had no Japanese developers, you had no games, you launched in the worst possible time that you could release. It wasn't a disaster, it was the disaster. I'm not sure I ever want to touch this thing again, to be honest. I'm just gonna leave it here. Now that I finally stomped on its grave one more time, I only have two more things to say. Number one, play Panzer Dragoon 2's Way. It is really good. And number two, goodbye.